Russia didn't lose control of the sky in a single moment. That's the mistake most people make when they look for explosions, shoot-downs, or dramatic escalation. None of that needed to happen. Russian drones kept flying. Routes stayed open. The war didn't suddenly look different on a map. What changed wasn't visibility, it was comfort. And when a military loses comfort in the sky, it starts losing control everywhere else. By early 2026, Russian drones operating near NATO's eastern edge were still in the air, but they no longer moved the way they once did. Flights became shorter, loiter times shrank. Certain corridors that had been treated as routine started triggering hesitation that didn't exist before. Not because the drones failed, because the assumptions underneath them did. And the place where those assumptions quietly collapsed wasn't a frontline city or a contested battlefield. It was Romania, not through escalation, not through confrontation, but through preparation that didn't need to announce itself. Once the sky stopped being predictable, everything beneath it began to slow, and Russia didn't immediately realize why. By the time it did, the conditions that made reversal possible were already gone. For most of the war, Russian planners treated NATO's eastern border as flexible space. Not safe, but usable. A zone where drones could probe, observe, and pressure without triggering consequences that mattered. The belief wasn't that NATO wouldn't notice. It was that noticing didn't automatically translate into action. That reading held early on. Romania didn't posture. It didn't issue threats. It didn't frame itself as an air power challenger. From the outside, it looked like continuity. Another NATO state maintaining airspace, hosting infrastructure, and staying inside alliance procedures. What Russia missed was the separation between rhetoric and structure. Romania didn't argue about airspace control. It quietly built the ability to deny it. Not with fighter jets or high-end interceptors designed for state-on-state air war, but with systems shaped by the exact kind of threat Russia relies on most: persistent, low-cost drones operating in contested gray space. This wasn't theoretical capability. The systems Romania moved toward had already been tested against Russian drones in Ukraine, under real electronic warfare conditions, against real countermeasures, and they worked. That distinction matters more than any technical specification, because Russian drone doctrine depends on one fragile assumption: that loss rates remain acceptable as long as pressure continues. Once interception becomes routine instead of exceptional, that math stops working. Attrition no longer favors persistence. It punishes it. Romania didn't need to shoot down everything to change this. It only needed to make the sky unreliable often enough that Russian planners had to account for risk where they previously assumed freedom. That's where control begins to slip. Not when assets disappear, but when certainty does. If this were 2023, none of this would have mattered. Russia still had margin then. It could absorb inefficiencies, accept friction, and compensate with volume. Drone losses were inconvenient but manageable. Pressure could continue even when effectiveness dipped. By 2026, that margin is gone. Every flight now exists inside a tighter equation shaped by endurance, exposure, cost, and escalation risk. The sky is no longer a separate layer. It's directly tied to logistics, timing, and political control. Romania sits exactly where miscalculation becomes expensive. Not because it's loud or aggressive, but because it's structural. Its airspace overlaps routes Russia uses to observe the Black Sea. It sits adjacent to logistics corridors feeding Ukraine. It exists fully inside NATO's integrated air defense environment, where denial doesn't stay local. That's the part Moscow underestimated. Once Romania altered the air environment, the effect didn't stop at its borders. It propagated through procedures, training, and shared awareness. What looked like a national adjustment became an alliance-level constraint. And constraints don't need to escalate to matter. They only need to remove options. Russia didn't suddenly lose the ability to fly drones near Romania. What it lost was confidence in how safely it could use them. That shift is subtle, but it's devastating for an offensive strategy built on pressure without escalation. Once planners begin treating the sky as contested rather than permissive, every operation slows. Routes require validation, timelines stretch, risk assessments multiply. Dominance doesn't collapse, it hesitates, and hesitation spreads, and caution is lethal to momentum. This isn't about Romania trying to own the sky, it's about making sure Russia can't. That difference is everything, and Moscow understands it. So the real question isn't whether Russia can still fly drones near Romania. It's what happens when every future air operation has to assume observation, interception, and denial without warning inside NATO's shadow as a baseline condition. Because once that assumption hardens, the war doesn't just slow down, it tilts. It starts moving in a direction Russia can't easily reverse. Russia understands escalation. It knows how to threaten it, posture toward it, and use it to freeze political responses. Missiles, rhetoric, exercises, all of that fits comfortably inside Moscow's playbook because escalation is loud and visible. It creates fear quickly, even when it doesn't create options. Denial works differently. Denial doesn't announce itself. It doesn't need declarations or deadlines. It spreads through procedure, not panic. Once a denial system proves effective in one place, it doesn't stay contained there. Training adapts. Airspace management adjusts. Shared data changes how neighboring forces think about risk. This is where the problem becomes larger than Romania. Inside NATO, air defense isn't treated as a collection of national bubbles, it's treated as a mesh. Sensors feed outward, lessons move laterally. A tactic that works against Russian drones in one sector becomes the baseline expectation in the next. That's what makes denial so difficult to counter. Russia can threaten a country. It can pressure a government. It can't easily pressure a system that improves quietly every time it's tested. Once Romanian airspace became less comfortable to use, that discomfort didn't stay Romanian. It entered planning assumptions across the eastern flank. Routes that once looked routine started appearing as liabilities in simulations. Risk that used to be absorbed locally began showing up as strategic friction. Escalation can be answered with escalation. Denial forces adaptation, and adaptation is slower. On paper, Russia has responses. It can alter flight profiles. It can invest in countermeasures. It can push electronic warfare harder. It can accept higher losses in exchange for continued pressure. In practice, each of those options carries a cost Russia can't isolate. Changing flight behavior reduces effectiveness. Heavier countermeasures increase expense and complexity. Electronic warfare exposes systems and patterns. Accepting losses accelerates exhaustion. None of these restore the old balance. They just manage decline. That's the trap denial creates. It doesn't force dramatic failure. It forces uncomfortable trade-offs, where every fix makes something else worse. Over time, those trade-offs compound until the original advantage disappears. And because this is happening near NATO airspace, Russia can't escalate its way out without widening the conflict, something it has spent the entire war trying to avoid. So Moscow does what pressured systems always do. It adapts just enough to survive, and not enough to dominate. What matters most here isn't how many drones get intercepted. It's how Russian planners start thinking about the sky. Once operators assume observation as the default rather than the exception, behavior changes even before orders do. Flights get shorter, timing gets conservative, missions stack delays on top of delays. Commanders hedge instead of committing. That hesitation spreads laterally, not vertically. No memo needs to be issued. No doctrine needs rewriting. Crews talk. Analysts adjust models. Risk tolerance narrows quietly. Over time, the air layer stops feeling like an advantage and starts feeling like a liability that must be managed carefully. This is the same psychological erosion that has reshaped other parts of Russia's military over the course of the war. Not collapse, constraint. And constrained forces don't lose all at once. They lose flexibility first, and flexibility is what makes pressure sustainable. From the outside, this still doesn't look dramatic. There's no single moment to point to, no footage that screams turning point, no headline that announces loss of control. Russian drones still fly. The war continues, but internally something has shifted. Romania didn't challenge Russia's air power directly. It narrowed the space where that power could be used comfortably. And once that space narrows in one structurally important place, it tends to narrow elsewhere as well. The eastern flank becomes less porous. The Black Sea corridor becomes harder to probe. The margin for error shrinks. Russia doesn't lose the sky overnight. It loses the ability to rely on it. Wars don't turn when one side runs out of weapons. They turn when one side runs out of clean options. What's forming near Romania isn't an air war. It's an environment where Russia has to assume friction before it assumes freedom. And once that assumption hardens, the entire pressure model Moscow relies on becomes harder to sustain without escalation. That's the danger, not confrontation, normalization. When denial becomes routine, dominance becomes expensive. And when dominance becomes expensive, time stops favoring the attacker. Russia is still flying drones near NATO's eastern edge, but it's flying them differently now. And in modern war, that's often the first sign that control is already slipping, long before anyone admits it. The Black Sea doesn't forgive uncertainty. It's enclosed, crowded, and shallow enough that mistakes propagate fast. Every drone flight, every radar sweep, every patrol overlaps someone else's assumptions. That's why denial near Romania matters more here than it would almost anywhere else. For Russia, the Black Sea was supposed to remain a controllable layer, a place where drones could still scout routes, pressure ports, and signal reach without crossing NATO red lines. That assumption relied on predictability, predictable corridors, predictable response thresholds, predictable gaps. Those gaps are narrowing. Once drones can't operate freely near Romania's airspace, flight planning across the western Black Sea becomes conservative by default. Missions that once fed targeting data into wider strike chains start arriving late, incomplete, or not at all. And when reconnaissance loses reliability, everything downstream suffers. Not dramatically, gradually. Strikes arrive less precisely. Timing slips, pressure becomes uneven. Russia doesn't lose presence in the Black Sea. It loses confidence in how to use it efficiently. That's the kind of erosion navies and air forces fear most because it doesn't announce itself. And it's hard to explain upward without admitting something uncomfortable. Crimea depends on predictability, not just for defense, but for reassurance. Russian forces there don't need total air dominance. They need consistency, the belief that surveillance will arrive when expected, that drones will fill gaps, that warning time will exist. Denial near Romania disrupts that belief indirectly. Routes that once supported wide area awareness now carry higher risk. Assets have to be spaced differently. Coverage windows shrink. Commanders compensate by leaning harder on fewer systems, which increases strain and reduces redundancy. This is how pressure accumulates without escalation. Crimea doesn't suddenly become exposed. It becomes less comfortable to manage. And discomfort is dangerous in a theater where Russia already feels watched, tracked, and constrained. This is the moment where people expect Russia to do something, threaten, demonstrate, escalate. But escalation doesn't reopen airspace once denial sets in. Missile strikes don't restore confidence to drone operators. Political warnings don't change interception math. Exercises don't remove the need to assume risk in every flight. Escalation is loud, denial is procedural, and procedures outlast rhetoric. Russia understands this, which is why its response remains muted. The cost of forcing the issue near NATO airspace is higher than the benefit of proving a point. Every aggressive move risks confirming exactly what Moscow wants to obscure, that its freedom of action is narrowing. So instead, Russia adapts around the problem, and adapting around a constraint is the same as admitting it exists. There's a moment in every long war where the question stops being, can we do this? And becomes, is this still worth doing? That moment doesn't arrive when losses spike. It arrives when efficiency drops below usefulness. For Russian drones near NATO's eastern edge, that threshold is getting closer. Not because drones are being wiped out, but because each flight now costs more planning, more protection, more uncertainty. That cost isn't visible on a battlefield map. It shows up in tempo. And tempo is what offensive pressure runs on. By itself, Romania doesn't decide the war, but Romania sits in a place where small changes create large downstream effects. Airspace denial there reshapes assumptions far beyond its borders. It forces Russia to think defensively about a layer it once treated as flexible. That shift doesn't reverse easily. Once planners assume interception is normal, they don't go back to assuming safety. Once caution becomes habit, aggression becomes expensive. This is how wars change direction without changing headlines. headlines. Russia didn't lose control of the sky near Romania in a single moment. There was no day commander circled on a calendar, no incident that demanded an emergency briefing, no announcement that something had gone wrong. It slipped the way control usually does in long wars, without noise, without drama, and without a clear point of return. Drones still lift off. Feeds still stream back, maps still update pixel by pixel, hour by hour. From the outside, it looks normal, but underneath that surface, something essential has changed. The sky is no longer a space Russia moves through on instinct. It's a space that asks questions back. Every flight carries an extra calculation. Every route carries a silent doubt. Every mission begins with the unspoken awareness that it might be seen, challenged, or interrupted. Not loudly, not provocatively, but efficiently. That kind of environment doesn't stop wars. It reshapes them, because pressure only works when it can be applied automatically, when movements don't require deliberation, when the attacker doesn't have to slow down to think. Once hesitation enters the process, momentum bleeds out quietly, not through losses, but through restraint, not through defeat, but through caution. And caution is corrosive to any strategy built on persistence. That's what's happening now. Not an air battle, not a confrontation, not an escalation anyone can point to. A narrowing, a shrinking of usable space, a reduction in freedom that doesn't announce itself, but compounds anyway. And in modern warfare, that's often how outcomes are decided, not when something explodes, but when options disappear slowly enough that no one can justify reacting to it. By the time it's obvious, the sky hasn't changed, the war has.